Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael Pickard, and I'm looking forward to talking with you a little bit about presentation over the next hour or so. Some of you attended workshops that I've done in the past on this, and you may hear some overlapping themes. So I'm going to try to hit some of the same things, maybe cover a few different things along the way as well. And a lot of what I want to share today is actually based on some feedback that the ELSEWORKS faculty provided after the most recent round of presentations that the ELSEWORKS team did. So I tried to dial in on some of those things. Does that make sense? I see that we now have plates and cups, so I'll probably stop and let us all get some food before I dive right in. But before we do that, let me just say a couple of things really quickly. First of all, as you can tell, my voice is kind of shot. We've got an illness moving through our household. We've got a 2-year-old who has also been dealing with this illness. And so it's probably been about 10 days since I've had a good night's sleep. So in addition to the voice, I'm kind of operating on a low bandwidth right now, so bear with me. But I'm excited to talk with you, and I think we got some good things. So first of all, let's go ahead and get some food, and then we'll reconvene, and I'll give you a roadmap for where we're going today, okay? Sound good? All right, thanks. Okay, so we are going to get started. I know a few people are still finishing up, and that's completely A-okay. But if you could be heading back towards your seats. Also want to just acknowledge and welcome the Finance Club. We really appreciate you joining us. I'm excited to have you here and hope that we can do more events like this together. I also want to just say, before I launch into the talk or the things that I want to talk about with you, that my office is in this building. I'd be happy to share my email with you if you come up after the talk. I'm available to follow up on any of the things that we talk about today, anything that you have further questions about or want to seek more information on. I like to tell people that one of the reasons why you should be choosing MilSAPs, why students choose MilSAPs, is that you get a level of access to your professors that you just don't get at a big state school. Does that make sense? A lot of us see our roles as being more involved in the lives of our students than we would be. I mean, I have colleagues who teach at big Research One institutions, and they know their students somewhat, but they don't get to know their students in the way that we do. Does that make sense? So please, take advantage of this built-in part of our community and reach out to me if you have further questions. I do have a lot going on, so I may have to set up a meeting with you at some other time, but I'm looking forward to getting in touch with you and talking with you, so don't hesitate to ask. Does that make sense, folks? Okay, great. The other thing that I want to just acknowledge right at the beginning, and I say this a little bit in my talk, but this is a weird room to give a presentation in. And if you've done the ELSEWORKS presentations already, you will know some of the weirdness of this room. One of the weirdnesses of this room is that the acoustics actually aren't that great. And so if you have people who are older than me, sometimes you will notice that they have a hard time hearing in the room. So it's especially important to be slow and to enunciate and articulate because the acoustics aren't great. Another part of the room is that it's wide like this, and it can be really difficult to kind of rotate and articulate and speak to the whole room at one time. I thought about asking everybody to move to the middle section, but in reality, when you give your presentations for the Board of Trustees and for our community at the end of the semester, people are going to spread out, and you're going to have to deal with this reality too. Does that make sense? I just want you to know that this is not every room that you give presentations in are going to present the same set of challenges. And one of the challenges of this room is that it's wide and it forces you to really kind of move and engage. And then this particular mic, you'll notice that there's a really big difference if I step away from it, right? So you can hear how big it changes if I do that, just like that, right? And so when you're talking during your presentations, you have to be aware of where you are in relation to the mic, because you may want to step aside for your partner or to think about how to move around to acknowledge a slide, but you can't do so in a way that's going to pull you too far away from the mic because it's going to have an impact on how people understand you. Does that make sense? I found this out the hard way the first time I gave a talk here. They recorded the talk for an event that I did, and I watched the recording later, and it was continually doing this and this and this and this, and it was kind of difficult to watch back. So just be aware that the mic here is a little challenging. Does that make sense? Okay. so I've given you a handout. I think most of you have the handout. If you don't have a handout, I will get one to you here. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. And I've broken up the talk today into two basic parts. We have a third part that's on the back. I just don't think we're going to have time to get to it. If we do, we'll go there. But I've given you some space to take notes. You don't have to take notes on this sheet, but I wanted to give you the option. And I'm going to circle back at different points in the talk and ask you what you are noting, what you are taking in as I talk, okay? So be prepared. I'm going to call on you for some responses in the course of this presentation. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, good. So it seems to me that you can break up any presentation that you give into two basic components. First component is the preparation component, everything that you do building up to the presentation. And then the second part is the performance itself. That's fairly obvious, but we're going to drill down into those two categories in a way that will pull out some of the constituent points. The thing that I want you to hear from me, and this is not only based on my experience, but based on what the ELSEWORKS faculty were observing as well, is that the first part of this model, the preparation part, is really crucial to your success. You have to either give a ton of presentations or be enormously talented naturally at giving presentations to kind of skimp on the preparation part of it. Unless you are kind of a natural at giving presentations, unless this is something you do all the time and you have a lot of experience with, unless you're talking about something that you know really well inside and out, you're going to have to put in the hours to prepare, the time to prepare. And the success that you have in front of people is going to be directly related to the amount of time that you put into it. Does that make sense? We live in this moment where we are offloading more and more work to machines. And it can be really tempting to think that you can offload parts of preparation for a presentation onto AI, for example. And there are maybe some things that AI can help you do in crafting a presentation, but there is no substitute for you doing certain things like rehearsing your script, and we're going to get to that. So there is just a baked in, if you want to give a good presentation, you got to create enough space in your life to prepare to give that presentation. Following me? Does that make sense? Okay. Good, so we're going to start with the script. So the most important thing, and I kind of have the ELSEWORKS analysts in mind here, but thinking also for people in Finance Club who will have similar experiences, the most important thing you can do with your script is to ask for feedback from one of the ELSEWORKS faculty members who are working on your team, okay? So whoever that person might be, make sure that at least one faculty member has a moment to put an eye on your script before you show up to deliver it. And don't just spring it on them. Give them a few days to read and process it. They'll give you better feedback that way, okay? Everything that I do, every email that not every email, but every paper that I write, some emails that I write, certainly every presentation that I give, I ask for feedback ahead of time. And I'm always better for the ideas that I get from other people. So make sure that an ELSEWORKS faculty member has a chance to put eyes on your presentation. Second of all, revise. I know that probably for many of us, I'm an English professor. I love to write. I love to revise. If I spend an hour working on a single sentence, I actually have fun doing that. That's a good use of an hour for me. That may not be true for you. But there is no substitute for working on your own writing if you're going to give a good presentation based on a script. And here's the thing, you can't just revise silently. Don't just read what you've written silently and then type it again you got to read it aloud if you're making a presentation. You got to hear how your sentences sound. And you will notice that your own ear is really the best tool at your disposal. When you start reading, you'll notice if a sentence works or not for you. If it's too complex, if it's too long, if it's too awkward, if the transition doesn't work. You really won't see those things if you're reading silently on the page, but they will pop if you start to read them, okay? So make sure, don't wait to read your script until you've gotten to the point of rehearsal. Read it throughout while you're writing it, okay? Because really, sentences that work perfectly fine on the page that people are going to read silently can be really brutal to hear someone speak in a presentation. Does that make sense? So read aloud as you're revising, okay? Also, what you're aiming for when you're revising and writing your script is you're aiming to sound as natural and conversational as possible. A presentation is generally not a place to sound like you have an amazing, complex vocabulary. You want to be relatable with your audience, and you want what you're saying to be kind of almost like a more structured and focused version of how you would talk without a script in real life. Does that make sense? So listen for that. Listen for the natural speaking rhythms that we all have in your presentation. Okay, I'm going to come back to the script at different points, but I'm going to leave that for just a moment, and I'm going to turn to your slides. I don't have slides in front of me right now, but that is a big part of your ELSEWORKS presentation, and giving slides is a big part of most presentations that you give these days. So here are a few thoughts about slides. A good slide is all about selection. It's going to call for you to make some hard decisions if it is going to be effective as a slide. You have to be able, in making each slide, to identify one or two, at most 3 pieces of information. If a slide is giving you more than 3 pieces of information, you probably need a different slide, 2 slides. Does that make sense? So you have to really select out. And these ELSEWORKS presentations in particular, because we have a large group, a large number of projects, you don't have a lot of time, and you don't have a lot of slides to use. So you are going to have to think really hard about what are the 3 or 4 things in your project that you want to highlight and how to organize them on your slides. Does that make sense? So almost the hardest part to me of putting together a slide is to identify those 1, 2, or 3 pieces of information that are going to have the greatest impact on your audience. And sometimes it may not be the things that you like most about your project. Sometimes the things that will be most impactful for your audience may be parts of the project that seem boring to you, or that don't seem maybe to be the core of what you're doing. So you have to think about, again, your audience's point of view. And if someone doesn't know anything about the project that you're working on, and they come into this room and you have 5 minutes to tell them what you're working on, what are the things that are absolutely crucial for them to have if you want them to walk away and think, that's a great project, I'm really proud of what these students are doing. Does that make sense? Okay. Don't just throw a bunch of stuff on a slide and hope to overwhelm your audience with mass, with volume. Does that make sense? Slides that are messy and cluttered with information actually do the opposite of what you want them to do. A slide should never distract your audience from you. You are the star of the occasion. If you're, let's say, giving a job talk, or there are potential employers or potential networkers or potential collaborators in the room and you're talking, they're not going to collaborate with your slides. They're going to collaborate with you. You want them to see you as the person they want to engage with. Does that make sense? And if you've put so much information on your slides, then the people in the audience are going to spend half your talk just trying to figure out what's on the slide instead of really listening to you. Does that make sense? So you have to be refined and selective and careful about what goes on your slide. Same thing with images. You may have a lot of images from your project, but choosing the right image can go a long way. And obviously there's more to say about this. We have a limited amount of time today. But this is the kind of thing that faculty can also help you with as you prepare your presentations. We can look at potential images and help you think about what might be the best one to go on a given slide. Okay? Be careful too about maps and complex graphics. Sometimes these are really important, but they can easily be overwhelming or hard to decipher. And something that seems clear-cut to you may be kind of confusing to somebody who's never worked on your project or doesn't know much about it, okay? So you just want to, in general, keep it sharp, but keep it simple for your slides. And less complexity is really important to something that you're trying to convey. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's some more concrete practical advice. If at all possible, come into this room or to the place where you're going to be giving a presentation and put your slides up on the big screen in advance. If you need help learning how to turn on the projector here, Landry can help you, I can help you. We can get you help so that you can come in here sometime when no one's in this room, turn on the projector and just look at your slides, because sometimes they will look a lot different up there than they do on your laptop. And it's important for you to see what your slides are going to look like when you're sitting way over here or way over there. And it gives you a little bit greater sense of how they might come across to your reader. In general, things that are sometimes really clear on your laptop don't look clear when they get blown up on this big screen. And a slide that can look professional, an image that can look like it works really well, can look grainy or unprofessional when it's projected on a really big screen, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Related to this, if you're putting a video in a slide, this is a good time to run the video in real time and see if it goes too fast. I think that's a problem that I have. Maybe people are different in this, but I'm a bit of a slow processor in real time. And sometimes I get a video that is a cool video, but it's just going too fast for me to really process. And so you may need to slow it down a touch or two just to make sure that the full impact of the video is being felt by everybody in the room. Finally, make sure your slides align with your script. If you talk and you say, I want to point out 3 main things in the course of this presentation, each of those things should have its slide. Does that make sense? Like, you want them to be in parallel with each other. So if you are organizing your script to make a certain number of points, make sure that that organization is reflected in the structure of your slides. Okay? Okay, going to move to our next. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to stop for just a second, because the next part is going to be a big part. So far, what have you heard? What has stood out to you? Is there anything that you want to note or ask about from the first few minutes here together? What have you put down on your paper? Yes?
That you don't always have to use like really big words. You want to relate to the audience.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce some things, and sometimes I'm like, wait, I don't want to say that. So that's good to hear.
Isn't it true that, we all want to be impressive, right? We want people to be impressed by us. And when there are smart people in the room, and when there are people like board of trustees or faculty in the room, you may feel a need to sort of maybe talk at their level or something like that. But in reality, talking like yourself is a far better way to connect. Talking effectively like yourself. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But it's also very obvious to people when someone is using a word whose meaning they don't really know. Does that make sense? Or when somebody can't pronounce a word, that can also cut against your credibility. And so it would be better to keep a simpler word and not expose yourself trying to pronounce a word that you don't know the pronunciation of, or to take the risk of using a word in a context that makes it clear that you don't really know what you're saying. So I'm a big fan, and I'm an English professor, of short and simple words. And there's a whole nother talk I could give you. I would love to talk with you if you're interested. Come see me in my office about how our English language is constructed out of these 2 competing yet related languages, Latin and German. And the German part of our language is a more monosyllabic, simpler, concrete, pragmatic part of our language. And the Latin part of our language is a more verbose, polysyllable, complex part of our language. And I invite you to lean into the German side when you're giving these presentations, because the words often are interchangeable and both do a lot of really good work for us. But that's another topic. So yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's take one more. Yes, thank you.
I think they're saying, less more. You don't want to write like everything, write your script, write your slides, because ultimately you're reading off your slides, which could be obvious. So I think you should write like less, like just some simple, solid bullet point, just elaborate on them, because I think people want to come out with you said, they want to hear what you have to say rather than what the slide trying to say. So it's better to elaborate on what it is.
Yeah, I strongly advise against putting the content that you are reading on your slides and then reading off the slides. Your slides should never replace you. They should supplement you. I agree entirely with that comment. If your slides can do everything that you can do, if all you're doing is putting even like bullet points on slides and then reading those bullet points, then it's kind of an insult to your audience to make them come to a room and hear you talk through your slides. You could just email your slides to them. Does that make sense? And so you want to make sure that your slides never substitute for you. And the other part of what I heard, and I think it's very true, I know from working on the Coffee Pros project this year, is that our team has done a whole lot And it's hard to summarize everything that we've done in just 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And it's going to be really difficult to kind of figure out what are those parts of your project that you want to put on the slide. But you have to do that, because if you try to do too much, you're actually going to, I think, create more confusion than clarity about everything that's happened. So yes, I agree with the content, and you heard my ideas right. So I agree with you there. Thank you. Just with an eye to time, we're going to dive back in, but I'm going to come back to this in a few moments, okay? Okay, so our next topic, and this is still under preparation, is practice. And I know you've heard people say this before. I know I'm repeating a lot of what you already probably know, but there's an advantage to repeating something, just so that you hear it again and again. There is no shortcut for practice. There's just not. There was a famous TV talk show host that probably you've never heard of, a guy named Jay Leno, who had a big moment when I was maybe a little younger than you, but not much younger. Jay Leno was famous as a talk show host because he would spend 6 hours preparing for every hour on screen. 6 hours preparing. He was a talk show host for decades, and even when he had been doing daily talk shows for 15 years, he still put 6 hours into every hour on screen. Does that make sense? There just is no substitute for the preparation. And you will find that your life gets complex. It's probably already complex and complicated and full of things. I know my life is. And the reality is that you are going to give presentations that you don't have time to fully prepare for. That's just how life works, right? But you have to also understand that you will get better, of course, the more you do, but you have to set appropriate expectations for yourself. And if you do not have time to prepare for a presentation but think you're going to knock it out of the park, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And if it's really important for you to knock a presentation out of the park, then you are going to have to go back into your schedule and create the time that you need to prepare for it. And that may mean setting aside other things that are important to you to do. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? Like to give you just a complete real talk example. I teach a class at 12:50 today, right when I'm done here. I've under-prepared for that class. You're hearing a professor admit to that because I wanted to prepare a little more for this talk. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? I don't like to make that choice. It's not a choice that I make often, or I make it as seldom as I can. But sometimes you just have to prioritize and create some time for the thing that is most important to you. And if you are, if it matters to you that a presentation like this go well, you have to create the time for it, okay? And what does preparation look like? Well, you should practice your script after you've written and revised it. You should practice it until you almost have it memorized. In theory, you should be able to work without the script in hand, although I also recommend that you print out a copy of your script and bring it with you just in case, okay? But you want to say it over and over again so that you basically imprinted the words into your brain. What you're doing is creating a kind of muscle memory, and your brain knows what to do. It will start to automatically learn the script as you rehearse it, and that will help you in the moment, because when you stand up here and are talking, things are happening all around you. You're noticing what people are doing in the room. You're worried about how your voice is projecting. You're thinking in real time, and you're nervous. And it may be harder for you to just kind of access everything that you know in reading your script. But if you've given your brain some repetitions, it can jump in and help you close the gap and complete thoughts and sentences for you in a sense. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that your brain is going to that you can go on autopilot. But if you've read the script 20 times, then your brain knows what's going to go next, and it's going to help you deliver it in a more natural way, even when you're nervous. So you want to read it and read it and read it and read it. It's also this way, when you read a script and rehearse a script this much, this is what helps you make eye contact with the audience while you're also staying with your script. If you haven't performed your script enough, if your brain isn't sure what's coming next, then you are going to do more of this because you're going to be more bound here. And this is okay, but it's not really preferable to being able to engage with people. People want to see you. They want to make eye contact with you. And a sure sign for anybody in the audience that someone hasn't prepared enough for a talk is that they're doing this. Okay, does that make sense? So that's another good reason to prepare, is that you want to be able to make eye contact as much as possible. I've said this before, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but again, if you do this a lot, you will learn to kind of get better at it naturally. You will improve. And sometimes you can, practice a little less than you ordinarily would. But I tell you, I'm 43. I've been giving presentations since I was a MILSAP student. When I have a good, big presentation to give, something that I really care about, I'm going to spend a substantial amount of time practicing. And I'm going to make time for that in my life because it just makes it so much better. Okay, so some of you may know this. I think I've talked about it before in our last presentation. But if you don't, my wife is a therapist in private practice. She works with children and adolescents. She's taught me so many things in the course of our relationship together. And this next part comes a little bit out of that relationship. And that is that you can do a little bit of visualizing, a visualization exercise beforehand as part of your practice. And it will help you, it really will, when you go to give the presentation. So I know that this may sound a little cheesy, or it may sound a little new agey, but bear with me. What you can do, if you feel like, especially that, managing your nerves is something that you have to work on, and it is for me in giving presentations, then one thing that you can do is find some time, maybe a day or two before the presentation, find a quiet spot, a spot where you're not going to be interrupted, and just be comfortable, sit, relax, close your eyes, and bring into your mind the room where you're going to be presenting. And make that room filled with people. The more specific you can populate the room in your mind, the better. You can put Dr. Culpepper in there. You can put Dr. Fender in there. You can put Dr. Pfizer in there. You can put President Neville in there. Put them all in there in your mind, okay? And you're closing your eyes. You're in a safe space. You're in a quiet space. No one's going to interrupt you. And picture yourself in your mind giving your presentation. You don't have to rehearse your script entirely because your eyes are going to be closed and you probably don't memorize it, right? But what I want you to do is to see yourself at the podium, at the lectern like this, actually giving your talk, and see yourself the way that you want it to go. That is, don't spend time thinking about the nervousness. Picture yourself mastering your content, owning your space, engaging with your audience, making connections, being the person that you want to be for the course of that presentation. And play that scenario out in your mind. Let your mind see what it feels like for you to do that in front of that audience. And you can do things like imagine yourself changing slides, imagining yourself answering questions. What you're doing there is you are sort of training your mind to know what you think the best version of your presentation should look like. And you're getting accommodated and adjusted to that within yourself. You can do this more than once, the more the better, in fact. And I think that you'll find, even though it may sound a little cheesy, that it will help you if you do that. That if you can just see what it looks like to be your best self, instead of leaving that undefined. Does that make sense? Like if you can define for yourself, to yourself, what it looks like for you to be giving your best presentation, that will help you when you get up to do the presentation. Next part is the last part of the practice, bullet point that you got on your handout. This also, does come a little bit out of conversation with my wife. Also just comes a little bit out of life experience. I was just talking with some people about comps, and my thing about comps is, the thing I always say about comps is that the best thing you can do, I know I'm not the only one who says this, but the best thing you can do to prepare for comps is just be a good student at MILSAPs. Like if you check out of MILSAPs for your first 3.5 years and then try to figure out what you need to know for comps in the spring semester of your senior year, that's not going to work. But if you're showing up and doing your classes work, if you're turning in your assignments on time, then that's going to set you up for success in comps. Well, there's an equivalent for giving a presentation, and that has to do with self-care. If you are eating healthily, if you're getting good sleep, the opposite of what is happening in my life right now, essentially. But if you're getting good sleep, if you're exercising, then you are going to set yourself up to feel your best And nothing makes a presentation harder than trying to manage your nerves, manage your content, and also to manage your tiredness or exhaustion. Does that make sense? So what I recommend for you is, especially if your presentation is really important to you, is to make sure that you're doing those simple basic things, like go to bed early the night before. Make sure you eat a really good breakfast. I'm going to tell you really quickly one of my embarrassing stories, which is that I gave my honors presentation here at Millsaps, not in this room, but in Murrah, actually. And I did not eat lunch before my honors presentation, which was an afternoon presentation, because I was doing something that I'm going to advise you against. I was writing my presentation at the last moment, and I skipped lunch, and I was way too hungry, and I was underhydrated, and I almost passed out at the beginning of my honors presentation. And it was so, the impact was so great that I actually had to walk out of the room and get some water and kind of take a breath and then come back in and complete my honors presentation. And I still graduated, and they still hired me 10 years later, okay? So it was all good. But my point is, don't be me. Eat and drink, hydrate properly in advance of your presentation. If you work out daily, I recommend that you try to get a workout in before your presentation if you can, but don't overdo it, right? Because you need a reserve of energy. If you exhaust yourself, by like hitting your best time, in a 3-mile run right before you present, your energy level is going to be down, okay? So exercise, but keep it at a reasonable level. Okay, so self-care is really important. What are you hearing me saying? Well, I'm going to turn back to you now. What are some things that you're hearing that you're taking away as we move out of the first part of this presentation? Yes, Brady.
Be natural. Keep slides simple. Images go a long way in telling your story. Slides should supplement you, not replace you. And just practice.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Very good. All of those. You listen. You know that saying. You've all heard that saying. Pictures tell 1,000 words. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? It's true with slides. Whenever I create slides, look, I'm a humanities scholar, so I don't give presentations in boardrooms, okay? Not generally. But I really focus on the images. The images are the most important part of any slide I give. And I don't put a lot of text on my slides. I put the minimum amount of text because I'm delivering the text here, okay? If there's data or a really important definition, data is important, okay? So like if there are numbers that you want your audience to see, they have to go up on the slide. If there's a graph that you want them to see. But in general, I don't try to put sentences or bullet points on slides because I can deliver that information verbally. And I don't want to de-incentivize somebody to listen to me. Does that make sense? Okay, good, thank you. Who else? One more person. Yes, thank you.
As far as like self-care goes, sometimes like there's a lot going on. You got midterms, tests, comps, and it's easy to be like, I'm going to stay up all night, not get much sleep, so I can prepare for this. But the trade-off is really there. It's like that extra hour of sleep benefits you a lot more sometimes than if you're staying late, and prepare for the script. So keeping that in mind is really important.
You have to be pragmatic with that came out really loud. You have to be pragmatic with yourself about what you can really accomplish in that extra hour when you're already exhausted. Like how much are you really going to do at 2 a.m. to make what you do at 10 a.m. the next day better? Does that make sense? But getting an extra REM cycle because you went to bed early, it's probably going to make a big difference in how you do the next day. So I agree with that. And I think the other thing that I wanted to add that I forgot to add was, and I say this as one of the most impunctual people you will ever meet, that being on time is super important for a presentation, because another thing that is only going to enhance your stress level is if you're running to get to the room and putting on your tie and your jacket because you didn't give yourself enough time to get there, and you're adding to the worry that you have about how your presentation is going to go, the worry that you're not going to get there in time, or that you're going to kind of be rushed. Does that make sense? So in general, I have a high degree of tolerance. If you take one of my classes, you will know this, for people who are a minute or two late. But for a presentation, make sure you're there at least 20 minutes early. 30 minutes early is ideal. It would be better to be there and sit and wait for a presentation than to be rushing in at the last moment. Does that make sense, folks? Okay, good. We're going to talk about performance now, just with an eye to time. One of the things that it's really not that hard to do, but no one tells you how to do it, and you just have to kind of figure out how to do it, is unless you're a performing artist. If you sing, or if you have done any public speaking or theater, you may have gotten some of this training. But this is projection. It is projecting your voice. And so there is a difference when you stand up at a lectern like this and how you talk than how you would talk in everyday life, in terms of how you use your voice as an instrument. Microphones make this easier, but you can never guarantee. In my experience, no two microphones are the same. I wish it were the case that you could just have a voice that you use for a microphone and a voice that you use when you went off microphone. But it just never works like that. You always have to make adjustments. But here's what you need to think about, is that when you are talking to a room, you need to project your voice all the way back to the back of the room. You don't want to be too loud, but you also want to make sure that your voice is carrying, that you are being heard. It defeats the purpose of people coming to talk or hear your talk if they can't hear you. And I have 2 tips for this, but really this is about practice, is that you really should, especially if you're an ELSEWORKS analyst getting ready to give a presentation, you should find time with your presentation partner to come into the room here and try it out. And let your partner stand in the back of the room and say, yes, I can hear you, you're coming through clearly, or no, you need to talk up. There is no magic wand for that other than just trying different loudness or volume levels out and seeing what works for you, okay? But you do want to be thinking about yourself as you're talking, to sending your voice out to the fullness of the room. It will help you do this. Some of us just have softer voices than others. And so depending on your genetics, which you can't really control to some extent, you may have to work a little harder to get this part of your presentation game on point. But it will help you if you can learn to breathe from your stomach, or from your diaphragm, as it's called, as opposed to your upper respiratory apparatus up here. If you can take your breath in and actually feel your stomach expand when you breathe, it's going to fill your vocal cords and your sort of vocal cavity here with all the air that it needs to push your voice out. If you played an instrument in high school, let's say, that would also be a good experience to draw on. What you're doing, though, is you're setting yourself up for talking effectively by breathing effectively, okay? And so you also have to breathe during your presentation. And this is another reason why rehearsing your script is really important. As an English professor, I can tell you that almost the entire reason why periods and commas and semicolons, not the entire, but a big part of why they exist, is to tell you where to breathe when you're speaking aloud. And so if you've read and practiced your script, you're going to know where those points are for you to get some breath in. And you have to breathe, because if you try to talk without recharging or refilling your breath, you're going to run out of breath really fast, and it's going to be hard for all of you. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there? So breathing and projecting. Projecting would be the kind of thing, too, if you want me to come and listen to you, just send me an email, and we'll come in here to this room and turn on the microphone, and I'll listen to you, and I'll give you some feedback, too. But it's worth practicing your projection if that's not something you've done before. And it's just a trick of casting your voice to the back of the room, making sure that you're heard. Along with projection, there's articulation. That's how you pronounce the words that you are pronouncing. That's what I mean by that, okay? The thing that inevitably happens in presentations, especially for people who are giving presentations for the first time, or people who are not experienced at presentations, is that you will see that the presenter begins to talk really fast, or too fast for the occasion. There's a reason for that. My wife knows a lot more about this than I do. But biologically, inherently, psychologically, standing up in front of a room of people is threatening for most people. Most people experience speaking in public as threatening because it is hard to predict how a crowd will react. If I'm sitting across a table in conversation with you, I have a far higher certainty of how you are going to respond to what I'm saying than if there are 500 people or 100 people or 50 people in a room, all of whose reactions I can't possibly manage or make sense of as I'm speaking. Does that make sense? Many people experience public speaking as essentially walking into a threatening environment. And what we know biologically, even though it's not, it doesn't have to be, it's just how our brains experience it, is that your body starts responding as it is programmed, hardwired to respond when you feel threatened. Is anybody familiar, I'm sure you are, with the flight-fight response idea? That some of us, typically when we feel pressured or threatened, we might tend to fight back, and others, our natural impulse might be to run away. We're not going to go into that here. But the point is that your body starts doing things like producing different chemicals that you need to react in the moment when you feel threatened. And so you're going to feel adrenaline. Your body is going to start feeling differently in many cases than it feels in everyday life. Your heart may start beating faster. Does that make sense? You ever have that happen when you're presenting? You feel that heart racing? You know, that might seem unsettling to you. It certainly did to me for a long time, until somebody pointed out to me that this is really your body doing what it needs to take care of you. And as your body is preparing for you to be in this situation, it's going to help you actually in lots of ways. The adrenaline and the racing heart and all of that stuff will help you think more clearly and respond more effectively to what's happening around you. But it does speed up your sense of time. And so what often happens is that somebody gives a presentation, and you'll notice that they really start talking a lot faster than any of us in the room can possibly follow, because their body is telling them that this is a dangerous situation and they're trying to prepare. And you see how I've sped up a little bit there, So this just happens. This happens to everybody. And part of becoming an experienced presenter is knowing to be aware when that's happening and just to slow down a little bit, okay? So what I advise for you is that at the beginning of your presentation, you may want to talk a little more slowly than seems natural for you. You may want to overcompensate for the adrenaline that you're feeling in that moment. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to talk so slowly that it becomes noticeable. But you may just find that you want to err on the side of giving your words some space. Does that make sense? I recommend that you do that at the beginning in a small way. Now, we're talking about turning that dial down just a notch, okay? Not 5 notches. But be aware of yourself as you're talking. And take a moment, this is another reason to practice your script. Take a moment to check in as you're reading and think about whether you're reading too fast or not. It's always better. If you find that you are reading too fast, that's okay. It happens. It's better to catch it and slow down than to not catch it. Does that make sense? So make sure, and this is a good reason to practice, but make sure that you are talking at a reasonable, natural pace for you, and a pace that your audience can follow. In general, what I find, I don't know if this is your experience, but what I find is that I get nervous right at the beginning of a presentation. But the more I'm up here, the more I'm in the space, the more I realize that this room is not going to, in fact, like pepper me with embarrassing questions or, it becomes a safer space. Then I start to relax and calm down. And I naturally speak at the volume and at the level that I'm used to speaking. Does that make sense? So I think this is something that happens mostly during the beginning of a presentation, but just be aware of it and practice as you're practicing your presentation, reading slowly and making sure that all of your words count. The fact is that if you put hard work into your script, you don't want to undo that work by pronouncing your script in a way that people can't understand. If you've worked hard to get a sentence right and then you race across it while you're reading it, then you've kind of I don't know, wasted the effort on that sentence. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So if you write a script and you take the time to get the script right, then make sure that you're paying attention to performing each sentence, giving each sentence its due, because it's worth it, because that sentence deserves it. The version of yourself that worked on that sentence, the earlier version of yourself, deserves this version of yourself to give that sentence its due. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So make sure when you're articulating that you are giving every word and every sentence its due. So time is racing away from us, and I'm going to move a little more quickly than I would like to have moved over some later parts of the performance piece here. But we can always talk more about this. We can do another session and go back to some of these. I want to say a little bit about body language. We've talked about this before, and I don't want to maybe go back into some of the stuff that I said in the last presentation. But you should be aware of things like, for example, what you're doing with your arms when you talk. If you feel a kind of natural expressiveness with your arms, that's a good thing. If you can use your arms as you would use in ordinary conversation to express your points, then lean into that. But if it feels stressful for you, then just hold them behind your back or keep them down at your side or hold them in front of you. But just be aware of what's happening with your arms when you're on stage. I've said this before too. I see some people who deal with the jitters of talking by swaying a little bit. And there was even I don't think it was ELSEWORKS, but there was a presentation I was at recently where there were two people giving the presentation. And it was like listening to or watching a gospel choir. They were all swaying in unison. And it was, kind of interesting sociologically, but it wasn't the experience that I think they wanted to create. So I recommend that you project and plant. You think of yourself as rooted into the ground. You relax your shoulders, stand up straight, keep your hands at your side. Hold them in front of you or behind you if you prefer. If you're comfortable articulating and gesturing, feel free to do that. But then what I invite you to do in this room especially is to try to imagine yourself pivoting outward in a triangle to the different parts of the room as you're talking. But don't actually move your feet. You're just moving the upper part of your body, okay, a little bit to project to the different parts of the room. There's a lot more to say, but again, I know that you all have classes, and I do too. Be careful about like slouching or hunching or, pressing yourself up against, the mic like this. Anything that looks more casual is going to reflect not in the way that you want a formal presentation to reflect. So I recommend that you stand up straight, that you try to avoid the urge to slouch or hunch, and that you instead really kind of open up your chest and allow your voice to project out into the room that way. Does that make sense? Last thing I'll say really quickly about body language before we move on is that, and I find this hard, this is something that I find hard to do. If you are comfortable, smile. People love seeing other people smile. And I know that when you're stressed and you're worried about what you're saying and worried about how the room is going to take in what you're saying, and you see all these faces looking back at you and nobody's smiling, it can be really hard to smile authentically in that moment, but give it a shot. And at least be aware, if you can, that, and we can't all, again, I'm not as great at this as I would like to be, but be aware that our facial expressions as we are talking do convey some information about us to our audience. And so if you can smile or, do your best to sort of project a calm demeanor as you're talking, I recommend you trying to do that. Easier said than done. Landry, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question too, kind of with body language as well. And I know there's a lot of roundtable discussions that we give for different presentations. I mean, ELSEWORKS for our panel, we have somewhere we're actually sitting at these chairs. If you're sitting at these chairs, what should your body language be? Someone else's?
You've anticipated my next section.
Good,
Yeah, good. So we'll transition right into that. So this section is self-presentation when you're on stage but not on the lectern. So this is great. Okay, so sit upright in your chairs. You might be tempted to kind of lean back and relax like that. Avoid that. You are on stage. If you are doing this in a professional business context, you are representing your company. You're representing ELSEWORKS. You're representing all of your faculty. You're representing the college, okay? So first thing is to sit upright in the chair and not slouch. Make sure that you are looking at the person talking as much as you can. Pay attention to them. And there are two reasons for doing that. One is that it's just a courtesy, to give your classmates and your colleagues the same attention that you would want to receive. But it also models to the audience that you are a team player and that you're bought into the team and that you are modeling the behavior that you want the audience to display, which is to pay attention to the person. Does that make sense? You want to be attentive to who's up there on the stage. If you are someone who's a natural note taker, taking notes while you're listening to somebody, conveys even more that you're really paying attention to what they have to say. So I want you to think about yourself as being on stage. Don't get into side conversations unless it's absolutely necessary. If somebody pulls you aside because there's something urgent that you need to address, that's one thing. But don't make jokes. Don't, kind of whisper about this or that. Your job while you're at one of these tables, even if you're not presenting, is to represent ELSEWORKS. And so you want to, as I said in a previous presentation, you want to channel dignified enthusiasm. You want to be dignified. You want to sit in a way that feels kind of appropriate. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? You're on stage. And the best thing you can do is just listen. And the nice part about that is that if you're paying attention to what the other person is saying here on the lectern, time is going to fly. And you're also not looking out at the audience, and you don't have those awkward moments where you're kind of looking out at the stage and you unintentionally make eye contact with somebody, and it just feels weird. Does that make sense? So if you're looking at the person talking, it helps you in lots of ways. Does that basically answer the question? Okay, good. Landry, I can't remember. Do we end at 12:30 or do we?
Yeah, a couple more minutes. They start class right about 12:50 for undergraduates, so maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Is that okay? I had a section on managing nerves, but I've talked a lot about that. I talked about that last time as well, so I'm going to skip that. But I'd be happy to talk more with any of you about managing nerves if that's something you want to talk more about. One important part that is related to performance, that is nerves related, that I just want to mention, and then I'm going to talk about some more pragmatic things, is to the extent that you can, bring as much energy to your presentation as possible and make sure that you are showing that you care about the topic that you are presenting on. If you're not excited about what you're talking about, if you're not energetic, if you don't care, then the audience isn't going to care either. You have to tell, one of the weird parts about presenting is that you kind of have to show your audience how to respond to your presentation by first sending that energy in their direction. Does that make sense? Like if you are energetic, if you are focused, if you are excited about what you're talking about, then in general, your audience is going to be more engaged. Does that make sense? And so this is also a part of the self-care piece. You have to get enough care of yourself to have the energy reserve. But make sure that when you stand up here, even if you're someone who's a little more laid back, and I get that, and that's, again, genetics and how some of us just are. But do what you can within the context of what's natural for you to convey energy, to convey enthusiasm for your topic, okay? It's going to help people respond to you more effectively. I know we got to go, but let me talk about some really practical things. Managing slip-ups and managing audience questions. No one gives 100% perfect presentation. It just doesn't happen. I've made several slip-ups over the last 45 minutes that I've been talking with you. There are things that I have written in my script that are a lot better said in my script than I just said them to you. There are things that I would say differently if I could roll back this 45 minutes and start from the beginning, okay? There's never going to be a perfect presentation. There doesn't have to be. Because the point of giving a presentation really isn't to be perfect. It's to connect with your audience. Ultimately, the presentation is just a prelude to the closer relationships that you're forming with your audience on the other side of the presentation. Maybe they're going to buy a product from your company. Maybe they're going to collaborate with you on something. Maybe they're going to hire you. But the presentation is never really the end in itself. It's always a means to something else. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And so if you've connected with your audience, that's the gold standard to my mind. Now, people may feel different about it, but if you think about it that way, being perfect isn't the point, but you do have to be good enough. You can't be, if you make so many errors that you seem underprepared or unknowledgeable about your topic, that will adversely affect the audience's ability to connect with you. So don't hear me wrong, but if you misstate something, or if you lose your way for a moment, or if you forget a place, or if you forget to advance the slide, the best thing you can do is just correct the mistake, not call attention to it, not acknowledge it, not make a big deal about it. If it feels like you have to acknowledge it, just do it really slightly and quickly, and then just get back on the road. Keep going, making your presentation. Does that make sense? You'll find that 2 minutes later, nobody in the room is going to remember the slip, if they even noticed it to begin with. And a lot of the slip-ups that happen, you don't know what my script says. So I could have just made up this entire talk. My script could be entirely different than what I just gave to you right now. And you would never know that. And so a lot of times you will notice the error, but the audience won't, okay? And you can make something a lot worse than it really is by giving it too much attention in the moment. Does that make sense? So just correct the error. If it feels like, it's important to do so, you can say my apologies or, sorry about that. But don't dwell on it. You don't even need to do that. You don't have to apologize. Everybody makes a mistake. Just correct it and move on to the next thing. Does that make sense? Okay. Last thing, with an eye to time, is managing audience questions. In my experience, attending a lot of presentations over the course of my professional life, I think there are basically two kinds of questions that you get. There's a kind of question that comes from an authentic desire to understand something about your presentation. Somebody who really has a question about something that you said and they want to learn more. And then there's the kind of question that the person asking is really just trying to display how much they already know. And they want you to know that they know just as much as you do, or maybe a little bit more, about the thing they're asking you the question about. We probably all heard those kinds of questions, right? You can't predict what kind of question you're going to get. I don't want to dwell too long on this, but I want you to know that if somebody is asking you a question just to gratify themselves because they want you in the room to see how smart they are, there is no answer that you can give them that is going to meet their need. And you're not responsible as a presenter for meeting their need. Does that make sense? Okay, that's their need. That's not your need. Okay, that's not your obligation. So if in asking the question, they hit on something that you want to comment on, then sure, comment on it. But if you see what they're doing, which is that they really want other people to see how much they know, and you don't really have an answer to give to this question, it's okay just to say, this is how I feel anyways. It's okay to say, thank you so much, that's a really interesting question. I don't have an initial thought to give back to you right now, but I look forward to talking more later. Because so much of what that person wants to hear is just that their question was good. They just want to hear somebody tell them that they asked a good question. And you're giving them what they need by just acknowledging that they asked a good question. Does that make sense? Now, you are going to get the other kind of question. And here's what I want, especially my comps people, to understand and know, is that anytime you get a question as a presenter, you've got a couple of options in your toolkit, okay? You're not locked in. Your most immediate and obvious option is just to answer the question. If you get a question and you feel like you know the answer to it, answer the question. It's always a good thing to thank the person for asking a question. No one has to ask you a question. Often people are asking you questions because they want to sort of help you feel heard. Does that make sense? So I saw this happening in the last presentation. You all did a good job of thanking the people asking questions. But make sure you thank someone who's asked you a question because they don't have to do that for you. But if you can answer the question, you answer it. Another option that you have available to you is to ask them to restate the question. You can do that in a polite way. You can just say, thank you so much for asking the question. I want to make sure that I understand the question so that I can answer it effectively. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about what you're thinking? And that has an advantage because it gives you some time to think. If the question comes and you don't fully know the answer to it or you don't know how you want to answer it, asking them to restate the question can give you some cues, and it also just gives you some time to formulate your answer. Does that make sense? And so you want to do so in a polite way. You don't want to make the other person feel attacked. You don't want to give the impression that you're asking them to restate the question because it wasn't a well-formed question. But you just want to say, thank you, this is a really great question. I want to make sure that I fully get it so that I can respond effectively to you. Would you mind telling me just a little bit more about this? And if you can identify an aspect of the question that you want to know more about, that's even better. Does that make sense? Okay? You have another option available to you. And that option is going to sound counterintuitive. You can just say, I don't know. That's not all that you can say. Bear with me here. And I want to make an important distinction. If the question is about something basic to your presentation, something you should know the answer to, and you don't know the answer to that, then saying I don't know is probably not a good thing. If it's something you should know the answer to, then it's on you to prepare yourself sufficiently to know the answer to that question. Does that make sense? So you want to avoid getting into that situation. But look, I've been in ELSEWORKS presentations. Your ELSEWORKS professors are really smart. They know a hell of a lot, pardon my French, about what they're doing. And sometimes they're going to ask you a higher level question about a presentation, and you may not be entirely sure what the answer to that is. If it's a higher level question and you really don't feel like you're comfortable venturing, I recommend that you try to answer. You say, this is what I can tell you. I'm not sure if I have the entire answer to your question, but here is the part of it that I can definitely answer. Or here is what the question makes me think about. You can partially answer. But if you really can't answer, if you really have no thoughts, then what you can say is, thank you so much for the question. That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to it right now, but I would love to find the answer out and get back to you and follow up with you about it. Okay, so you have to add the second part. And then you have to do something else beyond that. As soon as your presentation is done, when people are mingling up there, you have to go find that person. And you have to thank them again for their question and ask for their contact information. Say, I really do want to get back in touch with you about this. And the reason that you're doing that is that you're not only conveying that you value their question, even though you didn't know the answer to it, but you're also setting up a connection. And instead of leaving the interaction with that person on the basis of I don't know, you're leaving the interaction on the basis of a handshake and an email that you walk away with, an opportunity to have more conversation. And that's a lot better than saying, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question, and then just dropping it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So none of us knows the answer to every question. I've been studying English and American literature for 20 years. There are lots of questions that I get asked that I don't know the answer to. You don't have to know the answer to every question, but if you don't know the answer, you do have to make an effort to find it out and to convey it to that person. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I've gone too long. I'm going to stop there. But thank you for your time and attention. And again, please reach out to me if you want to talk more. Thank you.